Hey everybody, welcome back. This week I am continuing this series on enterprise podcasting, and I'm welcoming someone on the show this week. His name is Michael Gaines. Michael is the director of marketing for a company called NOV. I mentioned it last week on the show, but NOV is a company that manufactures and maintains equipment for the oil and gas industry. They have over 36,000 employees. They're based in 64 countries at over 600 different facilities. And I gave them as an example of a company that shares information internally through their podcast. So initially, they actually started their podcast internally as a way to engage with all of their employees around the world. They have regular roundtable episodes with C-suite leaders, helping explain some of the decisions that are being made in the business and how and why those decisions are important to the employees of NOV. That created a sense of ownership for a lot of NOV employees. Now, they also feature employees from around the world from different levels of the business to foster a deeper connection between employees and among the employees across the whole greater organization. Now, Michael's going to talk about this a little bit, but unexpectedly, the podcast became an incredible asset as a form of crisis communication during the COVID-19 pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, NOV was able to use its podcast to actually communicate health and safety protocols across the whole company. And then once things began to open up more, they were able to reassure their employees about the state of the company and the state of their jobs. So I want to get into this. Michael shares a lot of great information. So without further ado, here's Michael Gaines from NOV. Michael, thanks for joining me today. I want to just jump right in because we're in this time of COVID-19 and it's kind of emergencies all over the place right now. And you're one of those businesses where you are an essential service. So I want to know how, let's start first in times that aren't emergencies. How is NOV using podcasts and what effects have you seen in your use of podcasts so far?
Yeah. So, well, first off, thanks for having me, Danny. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what we're doing at NOV, and always great to talk to another podcaster. At NOV, we started using podcasts several years ago, really out of a kind of a conversation that we had as a corporate marketing team, where we were trying to find a creative and unique way of engaging the organization at Broad. So prior to that point, we used traditional media. We used newsletters internally. We used photography and video, but we were looking for ways that we could really capture an element that we hadn't really been able to harness a lot, which was kind of the emotion side of it. And so what we ended up doing was looking at ways that we could, combine both the content and what was for us kind of an emerging delivery mechanism to engage our constituents. So the way we use it now is we actually have several different types of categories of content that we produce. The one that has the most engagement would be kind of our quarterly sort of conversations that we have with our CEO. So what we do is, after our, we report out to Wall Street like every other public company, but later on that day, I actually sit down and have the opportunity to have a conversation with our CEO and CFO, and we just talk in very conversational tones, not necessarily discounting the work and effort that goes into the business, but making sure that the conversation is something that anyone in the organization essentially can jump into and understand, what happened that quarter, how did it impact our company, what does that mean for us, today, and what can we do as a collective moving forward. So that's been a really key, I would say, tool in our tool belt of communication within the organization to help align everyone from, presidents down to individual contributors on kind of the overall strategy and go forward plan within the company. And I think that employees have really resonated with that. I'm really fortunate to be able to get a lot of that direct feedback, and some of that feedback including, individual notes from long-term employees who say, I've been here for a long time, and now hearing this podcast, kind of hearing it for myself, I'm actually, I recognize the company does really have a vested interest in my future and my growth, and really appreciate that. We also use it in really helping give people an opportunity to travel and learn about our organization in places that some of them may not have the opportunity. When you look at the fact that NOV, we're in more than 60 countries around the world. That provides a great opportunity for us to serve our customers, but many times for employees, they may not necessarily have the opportunity to go and visit a colleague in Europe, or in North America or South America or wherever that might be. And so what this does is allows us to educate our employees, and of course we also produce some of this externally for customers and those interested in what we're doing in various places. And that's also provided a great avenue of discovery and shared learning as well.
Okay. And just because I may or may not get to this in the introduction and your bio, could you tell me a little bit more about, now you've got over 30,000 employees in NOV, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Where you said they're all around the world, are these mostly employees that are sitting behind a desk and commuting to that desk? Are they out in the field? Are they traveling around a lot? What's the makeup of the employee base?
Yeah. So, we kind of have, various sort of roles and responsibilities. There is a large group of our employees who are, kind of our frontline employees who are in either a shop or facility, or a fabrication type of building where they're actually hands-on, creating and building, the tools and technologies that we actually deliver to our employees. And so for those folks, a lot of our engagement certainly revolves around our external podcast, but also for the internal podcast, a lot of those are oftentimes consumed maybe in a kind of a shared environment. So maybe whether it's like a break room or something along those lines. And then we also, of course, have our employees who are either more office-based or field-based. So you might have a salesperson, or maybe an engineer who works at a desk, or an administrator who's in an office setting. And so for those folks, they also consume it, but maybe a little bit differently. So they might be consuming it while doing work at their desk. I've gotten notes from employees who say, I was listening to the podcast kind of in the background when I was sort of doing my daily work, and just similar to what you'd expect. Someone saying, "Oh, well, I was listening to a local radio station," and so, "Oh, well, I was listening to the podcast." And so for those folks, we're able to engage them as well, using the podcast, either through our internal distribution, or the app that the podcast app we developed internally as well. So,
okay, awesome. So you actually developed an app on your own to stay secure behind your walls.
Yeah, so that was one consideration we had, was, and that was kind of something I'd even thought about even early on, was, how do we, ensure, it's kind of that duality, right? That fine line of, you want to make sure that you have information that's easily accessible, but on the flip side, we want to be, responsible stewards of that information as well. And so, how do we do that? So, the great thing about NOV is that we're a really big, small company. And so, I very early on, engaged with our CIO, and also our app development team, and said, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to this new way of engaging employees. And so, in effect, what we did was, we engaged that team, and they're just really some of the smartest people that I know. And so they said, okay, well, we think we figured out a way, which basically involved kind of a combination of using Microsoft Azure from a cloud-based storage standpoint, in combination with some of the tools that we have available through the Office 365 platform. And essentially, we're able to utilize those. Plus, since we're a large organization, we use a mobile device management platform, or MDM as it's called. And so we kind of deployed this podcast app, which really is a pretty standard app, but just inside of that container, so that we could deploy it to anyone that has basically a company phone that wants to engage that way. Of course, for those that don't have that company phone, they can still access it internally through our Office 365.
Okay. Now, so because I'm really interested in that. And I want to get into the development, because I would like other companies that are listening to this that are maybe thinking about it and thinking, how hard is this? What was that process like? Was it something that they were able to figure out pretty simply and quickly? Or was it a struggle? Were there false starts and things like that? I also wonder, did you explore any of the, because I know you guys have an external podcast, did you explore any of the solutions presented by some of the hosting platforms, or was this, we need to keep this stuff very secure, so we don't want to go outside at all?
So maybe I can take a step back and kind of take you through the journey. So when we first started, I'm kind of an IT hobbyist. So I had already had several ideas of, at the very core of it, I have an MP3 file. How do I get this MP3 file out to everybody? And so I started this very logical progression. Well, I can email it. Well, no, IT probably won't like that because it'll bog down the servers and have this MP3 floating out there. It's like, okay, so I'll scratch that one. So then I said, okay, well, we're Office 365. Maybe I can put it in OneDrive, right? And I can send a link out to everybody. But then, you can still download the link, and I wanted to keep it secure. So I struck that one. So it was this very basic kind of, going through and striking ideas. And finally, I sort of took a step back and I said, okay, let me just think about it a little bit. And as I was thinking about it, I realized and remembered, seeing a IT blog newsletter talking about, I think at the time it was one of YouTube's, music streaming services. And I read the article and they were saying, a lot of people, try to use YouTube kind of like a jukebox, right? They go and they put in the song. And this was before, like, a lot of the streaming services really, really, were took off. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like using a video platform as an audio delivery service. And so I said, so I wonder if that could work here. So I said, okay, it's secure because it's behind the firewall. The user's authenticated because they have to be, they have to bump up against Active Directory. You can, listen to the audio on multiple platforms, and it's pretty much easily accessible in all those platforms as well. So it's like, well, maybe I could try that. So essentially what I did was I created an audio only video. So it was just a static splash screen. So our podcast is called NOV Today. We name it, the internal one, the same as the external. So NOV Today podcast, and episode 1, with the CEO, and so created that and pushed it out, and had quite a few folks listen. The first one, I didn't know if everyone was going to want to listen to it, if it was going to just completely tank or not, but folks consumed it, and of course we continued to produce that way for many episodes before we finally created the app. And candidly, I think I still have a lot of folks that prefer listening to it kind of in that video format, simply because they're at in the office at their computer. Of course, there are people that still use the mobile app, but for folks, it's just very convenient. They can kind of go in, and so we just hosted on what used to be the video portal, but now it's the Microsoft Stream. And so we use Microsoft Stream, which actually now has a lot more capability than the old product that Microsoft had. So now on the video, when I upload it, it's automatic transcription. So it'll automatically, do auto transcription for the video. So you can search, for specific phrases, things like that. So really that was kind of how we started, and really what we continue to do today. Now we've sort of just recently kind of broached the area of looking at video podcasts. So still doing audio, right? It's for folks that want to listen, but if someone wants to kind of see, some of the facial expressions and things like that, we're starting to move into that space. So, but it's been a really interesting kind of journey, especially in the beginning, where folks didn't really know, we went from what is this to, oh yeah, I think I heard someone talk about, the podcast, to, oh, that's interesting. And then, which was the brass ring for me, to, hey, I'm really interested in my business unit being on the podcast. How do we do that? And I'd always said from the very beginning, success for me wasn't necessarily that I had 100% saturation in the company, because I just, any medium, you're not going to have 100%. But for me, it was, okay, success is when I start getting inbound requests of folks that want to use this, because that means they see the value, they get it, they're compelled, they're moved, and they want to be part of that journey. And so I've been able to kind of have repeat success, if that's the goal, or that's the example there.
That's really interesting and exciting for you, certainly. So I don't know when this episode will air, hopefully in the next month or two.
Sure.
But so we're talking on March 31st, 2020, and we are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The United States has a stay-at-home order until April 30th at this point. It may go longer, who knows? But that's where we are right now. We have some states that are stay-at-home until June at this point, and most employees of non-essential companies, non-essential services, are working from home. You are an essential service, and I know, like, the last time we tried to have this interview, you had some things come up immediately that you had to reschedule because you guys were talking about what are we going to do. Can you share some of the experience of the last few weeks and maybe stories of how you've actually used your external and internal podcast to communicate with employees during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So like many other large organizations, there's been a lot of behind the scenes work going on with, all of our, health, safety, security, and environmental teams, our IT, travel and risk, and all of those teams who have really been working more than double time to ensure that not only our employees are safe, but that the customers and communities that depend on us to provide, the technologies and services are also safe. So that's been the number one focus for all of these groups. But just recently, after we've kind of, had the initial, sort of approach to ensuring that things are as in as best a position as possible. Our team kind of came together and said, okay, we recognize that we're going to be playing a very instrumental role in connecting our employees, but again, also our customers to our employees. So our sales teams that no longer can go and meet with customers and things like that. So we've actually been working a lot again with our IT teams who have really been stepping up, and as they always have, to support us. But with the podcast, we actually said, okay, how can we leverage our platform to engage employees? And again, because we're kind of in this area of sort of evolving the podcast, what happened was we came together and said, okay, this was maybe about a week or so ago, and the market was just fluctuating all over the place. And we said, okay, I think employees need to kind of hear, but really this was an area where we kind of departed and said I think they need to hear and see, from our CEO and understand, what's going on and how does this impact us. So that was actually the first time that we had branched into the space of an audio and video podcast, which I think is an interesting concept, and I suspect will continue to evolve, especially in the podcast world of not negating the fact that the audio medium is very unique in that it's one of the only ways that you can actually consume a message and still be able to do another activity, right? And so I think it's more of a strategic tool that we're starting to utilize. So in that case, we use the podcast to send out to employees who as many of us are, we're at their homes, right? That we're working out of their homes. And so because of that, we actually saw some of the highest consumption and engagement from employees of any podcast that we have produced up to this point in time, which of course is a mix of both, having kind of a captive audience, but also I think resonating with the message. So we've been using our podcast. We had our CEO, and we just recently finished taping a roundtable with our IT, our HR, our Chief Administrative Officer, and our Chief Health, Safety, Security, and Environmental Officer. So 3 of our kind of core functions that have been supporting employees in this time. And so we're giving them very timely detailed information on what is IT doing to help me. I've never worked at home before, right? Full time in this capacity. How do I do it? What hardware do I need? Our chief administrative officer giving insight and tips on, hey, if you're a manager, know that your employees will do a great job no matter where they are, and this is how we can best support them. And when you have kids running in like I have and probably will in this interview, I don't know, but that's okay. That's life, and let's all do this together because we're all in it together. So really helping use that as an opportunity to connect employees with leadership, and we plan on continuing to do that as the situation unfolds. So it's definitely a tool that we've just begun to utilize for this particular situation, and will continue to do so. Externally, we're actually going to be leveraging continued communication tools, of course, podcast as well, to try to reach our customers and those that are just interested to know what NOV is doing in a timely way as well.
Have you ever wondered how other podcasters grow their audience? Well, one of the best ways to do this is by being a guest on other podcasts, borrowing their audiences. So that's why I created the Publicity Power Pack. It's a product designed to help you learn how to network with other podcasters and get invited onto their shows. There's really no better way to grow your audience. The Publicity Power Pack provides you with everything you need to network with other podcasters, be a better guest, send pitches that people actually respond to, and begin your journey towards becoming an in-demand guest. So what are you waiting for? Let me help you grow your podcast starting today. Get the Publicity Power Pack only for $27. You can go to dannyosmond.com/PPP to get it today. One thing you might consider, since you have the Microsoft Stream platform, is to not just think about, okay, this is a video podcast that we're going to release, or we're going to record and we're going to release. But if you have the ability to do live broadcasting, to broadcast these conversations live, if the information is solid and everybody's comfortable doing that, but make that available to get that initial engagement. Or even if you're doing the external stuff using LinkedIn Live, Instagram Live, Facebook Live, whatever you have access to, recording that, editing that down into your podcast, so you can essentially save a step of thinking about recording both at the same time. Yeah,
well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I just sent a note to our CIO this morning and said, hey, we're going to get our CMO, who's my boss's boss, and we're going to do a Teams live event internally, just to kind of get it out. I mean, we're an approved beta tester for LinkedIn Live as well.
Okay, yeah.
So we want to just kind of feel it out for a large audience in terms of engagement we get, and then our plan is to go ahead and do a LinkedIn Live broadcast as well with our CMO. What are we doing with customers? Kind of our HSE. What are we doing to keep
Gotcha.
So we're actually great minds.
Very cool.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're on that path.
Cool. And you've given a lot of information on, you all have a very diverse offering. It sounds like you're equally exploring video as well as podcasting. You probably have blogs as well, in terms of communicating internally and externally. So I encourage people to go back over these last 2 or 3 answers and just really, jot stuff down. And I'll make sure that in the show notes, we kind of hit all these bullet points that you've mentioned. We're using the podcast because it's connecting with people more. We're using the video so that people can see who who they never see, or they don't see often, or maybe they've never met. It's extremely helpful. Now, so you're pretty active in this world. Have you seen any other businesses very recently, or even before, use something similar, particularly internally? What are some other businesses that you've seen, and how have you seen them use it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because just the nature of an internal podcast makes it such that it's almost like a speakeasy. If you don't know where to knock and who to know and what, then it's kind of hard to know. For me initially, when I first started out several years ago, I really, I have a background in doing voiceover work, so I was familiar with to a certain degree a little bit of audio and audio editing. I've done it for about 15 years, but outside of that, I wasn't really familiar with, well, how do you produce a podcast, and especially internally, and what are some considerations, and how do you engage folks? So I started down this path of doing some desk research, which I couldn't find a lot of. And so then I said, okay, well, I started going to some podcast conferences, and, started asking folks and said, hey, do you do an internal podcast? And they say, well, no, like, do you? And I was like, yeah. And it was always this, really, like, how do you do that? I was like, well, I don't know. Like, I need to find somebody to tell me, because I don't know. And so finally I said, okay, I'm just going to start doing this. And if I find somebody that does it, that's great. And so again, because of just how great our IT team is, and our whole information group is, our CIO specifically, I one day, my CMO said, hey, maybe Microsoft does something. I was like, oh yeah, maybe they do, because we were just starting to continue our relationship with them. So through my CIO, I got in touch with the Story Labs team up at Microsoft, who then got me in touch with some of their production folks at the Microsoft Studios. And so they kind of helped sort of open my eyes a little bit to some of the tools and approaches that they use to engage their constituency. Of course, they're more than 3 times as large as us, but they obviously are the ones kind of eating their own cooking, so to speak. And so that was helpful to really start thinking about, for me, transitioning from just kind of pushing content out to making it a dialogue, and really having a kind of bi-directional feedback. So you send an episode out, but you get that feedback, and then the second episode starts playing on the feedback that you got in the next one, and what else could this be? So that was really, really insightful. Also, I think it was really, I hadn't really found a lot of companies that were doing internal ones. I mean, I think the first time I had heard about a lot of the other internal episodes was, you may have been familiar, there was a Wall Street Journal article that had come out, I think maybe last year. And it was a really, really good article, because it gave insight on, Home Depot has an internal podcast, and American Airlines, and I think United Airlines, and several others. And so kind of reading and that article, again, sort of gave me a sense of maybe motivation, only because the premise of the article was saying, well, internal podcasts are so boring, and why would employees want to listen to an internal podcast? And my mantra from day one had always been, I'm not going to produce anything that I don't want to listen to.
Exactly.
One, that's disingenuous. Two, that's not fair to the listener. So that's why I started exploring things, topics like, what our company is doing with SpaceX. It's like, oh, well, I think space is interesting. Maybe I'll produce an episode on that, or, those kind of things.
Right.
And so kind of using those sort of metadata and pieces to sort of kind of inform me. So to answer your question short, I hadn't found a lot of companies. It was more of a trial and error, so to speak, which has been really, really rewarding.
Well, it's good to hear. It's good to hear your stories, because you've taken, I've mentioned before Marriott and Geico and Disney, and you had seen in this article Home Depot and American Airlines and United. It's nice to then transition it down to you, NOV, which is a large corporation, a global corporation, but smaller, and how it can still be effective even if you've got 30,000. And I mean, my opinion, it can be effective if you've got 10.
Exactly.
It's a way that you can connect with employees in a different way, in a way that they, you may not get the chance to in a meeting or in a memo or a blog or a video even.
Yep.
Okay, so that's fascinating. Now, you mentioned that you had some background in this audio editing and voiceovers, and you've done this for a while now, and you had the support of the IT people in NOV. But I want people to hear about maybe a false start, or a mistake, or a crazy experience as you were getting this off the ground. Did you have any experiences like that, and what were they?
Yeah. So, it was interesting, especially as we started out. I went in, eyes wide open, ready to jump in at any opportunity. And so for me, really trying to understand, what can this be and where can this go, led me to, very quickly to opportunities to interview a lot of different people. One of the experiences I learned very quickly, and I was able to learn a lot from actually so my title's, The Voice, and I sit next door to the NOV storyteller, who is our company cinematographer. And so a lot of the storytelling techniques and ideas and concepts initially, he influenced me. Paul Dufio is his name, and he helped influence a lot of how I approach storytelling and story creation. And so when I started out, I had no reference or concept of how do I know if I have enough footage or audio footage or not. And so I remember there was one particular case where I was telling a story. I think it was our episode Big Data, and so talking about how NOV is helping customers leverage their data, right? We're data stewards. And so I remember going to one of our facilities, and I spent several hours. I remember distinctly on going around one of our facilities, a very, very large facility. And I remember, I mean, I spent hours interviewing so many different people. Tell me your story and what are you doing here? And I was looking for something specific, but I didn't know how to sort of vet that ahead of time before actually getting on location. So I was like, okay, the more audio, the better. And I ended up interviewing somewhere in the neighborhood of more than a dozen people, probably a dozen and a half folks. A couple hours worth of audio. And when I finally put the story together, I said, well, really, all I needed out of that whole day, I just needed that one guy. And of that one interview, I only needed about 30 seconds. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, man, like I was so exhausted. I'd spent like days combing through all the audio, trying to look for it, trying to understand, what is this? How do I kind of pigeonhole this interview into the story, even though it doesn't fit? And so, it was it was a great, frustrating opportunity because I finally realized, everyone has a story, and that is great. And I think it's really honoring as storytellers, as a podcaster, to be able to go in and capture that. Everyone has a story, but not everyone's a storyteller, and that's okay too. Like that is totally okay. Just like everyone can have access to a pencil, but that doesn't make you an artist, and that's okay, right? There are certain folks that can deliver something in a way that you need it, and so once I kind of realized and accepted that that's kind of how it is, then that sort of opened me up to say, okay, I can go into a conversation or two, and if it's what I need, that's great. If it's not, that's okay too, because I've made a connection. I've been able to cultivate a relationship. But for this particular project, maybe I don't need that. I might later on. So that was helpful. But yeah, that experience was something else. And then another one that I learned from my colleague Paul is don't forget to hit record. And so this happened. I had a trip. It was our a podcast that we did on a facility, a fiberglass facility that we have in Plymouth, England. So had the opportunity to fly over, take the train down. I mean, beautiful scenery, got to just envelop all the history. And anyway, so it was one of my first international assignments. Was a little bit jet lagged, but had great conversation with two of our leadership there. Finished the interview. They walked out, and I was like, man, that was great. I was just so invigorated. Let me listen to it, and I hit play, and the first thing I hear is, "Thank you for being with me today." I was like, "Oh, wait, let me rewind," and that's all it was. So I learned very quickly that you always have to remember to press record. It doesn't matter how good of an interviewer you are. The record button is your friend. So,
it is.
It's the simple things that make the difference. But yeah, I mean, it's things like that. I was on another assignment in Navasota, which is a suburb, or it's not a suburb, but a city in West Houston. And same thing. I had an assignment. It was an early morning assignment. We were actually interviewing a gentleman from his home, and I was going to ride with him as we went up to his job. And so I got there, had all my equipment, and I hit record, and it said no SD card. And I was like, well, maybe that's just an error. I was like, oh, no SD card, and it was just a really kind of mortifying, might be underselling it, but just a really terrible experience of like, how do I do that? What am I doing? But again, it's just a realization that people are gracious, and the gentleman was really nice. I ended up, I think, recording on a cell phone, and I had a colleague rendezvous with me when we got up there, and it was this whole swap and change and SD card. But I think just realizing that mistakes are going to happen, SD cards are going to fail, you're going to forget to hit record, you're going to get way too much footage on a project that you don't need, but you can't appreciate the sunny days until you have cloudy ones. So that's a
good
really
lesson. Good. Yeah, and it's always good to have that checklist by you. That it's like pilots. I know they have a lot of free time on their hands right now, but having that checklist keeps you from making those mistakes, and especially
part of my background was aviation. Okay. So that's what they always said was checklist save lives, and in this case, checklist save episodes. So.
Especially if, like, in your situation where you're all over the place in different locations and traveling, and that's the thing personally that always makes me nervous when I'm traveling to a client to record them for the first time, is going through that gear list to make sure, okay, I have this? Do I have this? Do I have the it's called an iLock that has all my licenses for the different software that I need? Do I have that USB dongle to plug in to make sure that this stuff works?
Right.
Well, this has been a really rewarding conversation, really fascinating, and I'm was glad that Andy introduced us. If people want to learn more about you, the work you do, if they want to learn more about NOV and specifically NOV today, where can they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can, if you want to know a little bit more about me, you can go to nov.com/podcast. Also, if you just want to send an email, you can reach me at podcast@nov.com. Also, of course, our podcast is on, Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, and so forth. But yeah, always happy to, take a question, or if there are topics that folks are interested in, or really just anything about podcasting, I'm always game for that. And of course, LinkedIn, I'm there probably more often than what I'd like to admit. So happy to connect there as well.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you again for joining me.
Thank you.